In the late 1980s and early 90s, the personal computer revolution was in high gear, and with it came efforts to make PCs friendlier and more accessible. One of these was Hypercard, a free Apple-included app with new Macintosh computers that let novice users make their own stacks of interactive cards, which had a friendly interface and a natural language method of telling the computer what you wanted it to do, called HyperTalk. The promise of Hypercard was to enable a new breed of multimedia creators. Museum gallery curators, business owners, encyclopedia authors, and all kinds of normal people found that they could make interactive software for themselves without having to code. People even made game experiments in Hypercard. The classic adventure title Myst, which you might have heard of, was first released as a Hypercard stack on Mac. Today, the web uses HTML, or hypertext markup language, to present multimedia and interlink web pages on all kinds of platforms, not just Macs. Mentioning this sounds corny because we take it all for granted. After all, we're surrounded by interactive multimedia, and yet making that media isn't something anyone can trivially do. Being a web developer or any kind of programmer still requires education of some kind, and it's not an immediately intuitive process, like Hypercard promised it could be. While the Mac was beloved by some in the 90s, it was still a small computer platform at the time, so Hypercard and its stacks of user-created software were also small and never really went mainstream. I think that's a shame because Hypercard could have been to programming what iMovie and TikTok are to video production today. It had the potential to demystify an industry and let average people make their own apps. Some 30 years later, Apple's a far bigger company with a lineup of ubiquitous products, and yet it's still trying to make software friendlier, this time in a slightly different way. Swift Playgrounds is meant to let hobbyist programmers and novices tinker with Swift, a programming language that's designed to build apps for Apple products chiefly. However, Swift is open source and can theoretically be used in any kind of environment, so it's already more flexible than Hypercard ever was. Last month, Playgrounds received a big update letting people make and publish an app from start to finish, all from an iPad. Playgrounds already includes a series of very friendly tutorials to get people started with coding. So in an effort to see how accessible learning to code could be in 2022, I, a liberal arts college student, locked myself in a conference room for several hours one morning to take a programming crash course in Swift Playgrounds. Here's how that went.
I'm really excited to learn how to code and make my first app. There's just one problem. I'm an English major. Hi, I'm Max Patton. I am a college senior, and I've never taken a computer science course. What I want to do here is look at Swift Playgrounds, which is a kind of introductory programming environment intended for new, novice app developers and people to experiment with, specifically for iPads, because iPads tend to be more affordable than Macs and other computers. So this is kind of basically Apple's, very ingenious way of incubating people into making apps for their platform. But I do think there's a lot of merit and potential here in teaching people how to program, like myself, who know nothing about it. So let's just dive in. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start a screen recording on my iPad so you can see what I'm doing. So that screen recording just started. I downloaded the Swift Playgrounds app, which is free, which is great. So you can get an iPad for as cheap as like $300 and a Bluetooth keyboard and be off to the races here. It is an interesting use case. We've seen Apple kind of target its devices towards creatives, towards making music, making movies and stuff. It's kind of cool to see that same spirit applied to developers who make apps for their platforms and other things. So, let's try to build an app. I'm in Swift Playgrounds here, and I've downloaded my first package, which is called Getting Started with Code. So I'm going to skip all of these introductions because I'm an irresponsible person, and I'm going to start coding. All right, let's wait for things to initialize. So what Apple's done here is kind of make this little interactive game to teach you how to program. So I have this little character on the right that I'm going to get to collect a gem. So let's tap to enter code. So it looks like we need to get him to move forward. So I'm going to type move forward like it tells me to, and I guess I do open and close parenthesis, and that's a function. And so now I have to hit run my code. Oh, he moved forward. Okay. So it's giving these kind of useful real-world-ish metaphors for these computer science concepts. Now, this isn't, something Apple invented. I think a lot of programming books do this, but it's kind of cool to have these graphics and this kind of nice, friendly format that's gamified in this way. All right, so something I'm learning here now is also there's some like interesting gestures and interface features and quirks of Swift Playgrounds. So it looks like I have a shortcut list to kind of add things. So I'm going to add a for loop, which is something I've recently learned about, which is something that lets you repeat code a given number of times. So I'm going to go and hit for, and now I have these curly braces, and it's saying I can press the bottom curly brace to select the loop. So now it's highlighted. And now if I drag it down, I can kind of include all this code. So this is kind of a really cool concession for touch and for the iPad interface that you wouldn't see in like a traditional programming environment. So that's kind of cool. So let's see if this works. Oh, I have an error. Lovely. I need to, oh yes, I need to repeat this a given number of times. Duh. Okay, already I'm starting to learn some pretty common, I believe, programming lessons. Typing matters. So I had, this is gonna sound like gibberish, but a if statement to say, if I'm on a gem, collect a gem. Turns out I needed that to be a capital O. So that was kind of bad programming on me because I wasn't listening to these suggestions here, which actually autocomplete for you. All right, I'm just learning lessons left and right here. So I had an issue where my keyboard wasn't being recognized, classic iPad problems. And it turns out it was just the Swift Playgrounds app, so I had to restart the app. That's great. It's a little bit buggy just because, you know, software. But something I noticed that was cool is when I restarted the app, it saved all my progress. So if you know, like, you know, I don't know, I mean, the Google Docs generation makes this analogy kind of hard, but if you typed in Microsoft Word or, you know, worked in a program like Adobe Premiere, you know, you have to save frequently, and if you don't, if it crashes, you'll lose your work. With the way Playgrounds works, it's auto-saving all the time. At least that's what it seems like to me. So that's really cool. That's, you know, how things should work with computers, so I'm glad that's the case. Anyways, let's see if what I've done is going to work. So I'm going to make I think a for loop here to repeat this. All right, so one interesting thing I've picked up in doing this problem is, I'm, by the way, learning about a not operator, which is where you can put an exclamation mark on a conditional statement and make it the opposite. So is on gem would be, if you're on a gem with an exclamation mark, it just means it's false. But what I've learned is there's not only the option to run through your code faster, but you can actually have it do what's called step through my code. And this is cool. So it shows you line by line how it actually interacts with the playground. So you can kind of see it running with this for loop, repeating, going line by line, how that affects the behavior of my character. With the solution I've written. So I'm having him turn left a bunch of times to turn himself around so that he ends up going the right way. And it's kind of cool to see that step by step. That's helping me a lot. So cool feature. All right, so the last lesson for today is just learning about variables. I've learned about assigning variables and how to increment them, which is a powerful thing I can see in computer science. But the way, of course, Swift Playgrounds teaches you this is with moving this character around, you know, and making basically a really dumb artificial intelligence. This is a far cry from Skynet, but I find it very funny that this is, I don't know, this is just how you learn it. I think this is really playful and this is really fun. It's been a cool experience learning Swift Playgrounds and a little bit of Swift. I feel like this is somewhat transferable knowledge. You know, they're not just teaching you their mousetrap. You can actually use this functionality in, I am pretty sure, any programming language. So this is really cool. I'd love to hear feedback from computer science people or from other English majors who, you know, liberal arts people who might want to try something like this. And yeah, I hope to do more of this, you know, do more of these lessons. I'm only about halfway through the Getting Started guide, and I think there's even more built-in tutorials. So this is a really great resource from Apple, and it obviously has its limitations. It's limited to iPads, and like we've experienced, it has a few bugs, but this is cool. And it's, you know, the fact that even an English major can learn a little bit of programming, I find that, you know, a little satisfying. So I haven't learned much, but what I've learned I feel good with, and yeah, that's been that.